Imagine, if you will, that you're just sitting in your kitchen, right? You're a bit hungry, and you turn to your friend and you say, I intend to execute the preparation of the first course.
I mean, I would probably assume some kind of malfunctioning android had taken over your brain, or, at the very least, ask if you were feeling okay.
Yeah, it's incredibly stiff, isn't it? It sounds completely robotic.
Right.
But what's really fascinating is that this is exactly what you sound like when you strip this very specific, almost invisible grammatical feature out of spoken English. Because, I mean, all I really wanted to communicate was, I want to make soup.
Right, and that gap, that massive, linguistic canyon between sounding like a rigid AI and sounding like an actual human being,
Yeah.
that is bridged almost entirely by something called phrasal verbs.
Exactly. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are pulling from everywhere. We've got frustrated English learners venting on Reddit's grammar forums, academic papers on linguistic history, and some really comprehensive vocabulary databases.
It's a big stack of sources today.
It really is. And our mission is to figure out exactly how these invisible words control our speech. So whether you are learning English or even if you're a native speaker who just wants to understand the sort of hidden operating system running your own brain.
Which is always fun.
Right. Our mission today is to decode the mechanics of phrasal verbs.
And it's a critical mission, too, because up to 80% of the verbs used in everyday English speech are actually phrasal verbs.
80%.
Yeah, up to 80%. Mastering them isn't just about passing a vocabulary quiz. It's really the ultimate requirement for sounding natural.
So before we get into the hidden rules of how to actually use these verbs, we first need to define what they are, right? And kind of separate them from their grammatical cousins.
Right, establish the boundaries.
Yeah. The sources basically describe a phrasal verb as a basic verb attached to a little sidekick, a particle, which is usually a preposition or an adverb. So you take turn, you add off, and you get turn off. But let me push back on this right away. If it's literally just a verb sitting next to a preposition, how is that any different from a regular prepositional phrase? Or, I don't know, an idiom?
Well, that boundary is exactly where most people get tripped up. To clarify this, we really need to look at how the meaning operates.
Okay.
Let's look at three distinct categories, right?
Right.
We have prepositional verbs, phrasal verbs, and idioms.
Okay, lay it out for me.
So a prepositional verb is a locked unit that expresses a literal physical trajectory. The preposition just clarifies the direction of the action. Take the phrase rely on. You cannot separate those words, and the meaning is highly direct.
Oh, there's actually a brilliant example of this distinction in the Reddit thread we reviewed.
Oh, yeah, the user,
Boglin007.
right, Boglin007.
Yeah, they pointed out that a phrase like turn off can actually be two completely different things depending entirely on the context.
Exactly.
So if you say turn off the road here, that is a prepositional verb. It's a literal trajectory. You are physically turning your vehicle off of the asphalt.
Right, the meaning is entirely compositional. You just add the meaning of turn to the meaning of off.
Right.
But if you say turn off the music, you have officially crossed the boundary into a phrasal verb.
Because the music isn't physically driving on a road.
Exactly. The particle off has undergone this dynamic shift. It no longer means a physical direction. It's adopted a figurative meaning, which in this case is to deactivate.
Okay, so a prepositional verb is a literal trajectory, and a phrasal verb introduces this figurative shift.
Right.
But then where does an idiom fit in? Because idioms are also figurative, right?
They are. But idioms take that figurative shift to the absolute extreme. They completely detach from the component words.
Like what?
Well, if someone says they're going to, kick the bucket, meaning they're going to die,
Right, yeah.
there is absolutely no logical linguistic path from the physical action of kicking a bucket to the concept of death. It is a purely cultural agreement.
Oh, I see.
But with a phrasal verb, you can usually still trace the logic. You can deduce how turning a physical dial off leads to deactivating the music.
That makes total sense. To really illustrate how much cognitive weight that little particle carries, you just have to look at the base verb take. The vocabulary sources list, dozens of variations just by swapping out the particle.
Oh, take is a wild one.
It is. Takeout might mean inviting someone to dinner. Or, in a video game context, eliminating an opponent.
Right. The base action involves removal, but the particle directs that removal into a completely new semantic universe.
Exactly. And then you swap it to take up. And suddenly it means starting a new hobby, like I took up yoga.
Yeah.
You swap it to take after, and it means to resemble a parent. She takes after her mother. Or take in, which could mean sheltering a stray dog or, being completely deceived by a con artist,
Just one single word shifts the entire architecture of the sentence.
which naturally leads to the real crux of the issue. If these verbs are so vital and so versatile, why do they generate so much confusion?
It's a great question. And the answer lies not in the vocabulary itself, but in the invisible, highly rigid mechanics of English syntax. Specifically, the rules governing what can and cannot be separated.
Yes. This is the part of the grammar forum that was absolutely blowing up. People were highly fixated on word order. Let me bring up a specific scenario from the original poster on that Reddit thread.
Oh, the pronoun issue.
Yes, the pronoun issue. So they notice that it is perfectly fine to say, check the article out. And it is equally fine to say, check out the article. Both are 100% correct.
Right.
But the moment we replace the article with a pronoun, like the word it, we are forced to say, check it out.
We have no choice.
Right. If someone says, check out it, it sounds horribly offensively wrong to a native ear. But why?
I mean, it literally feels like nails on a chalkboard, doesn't it? Even if a native speaker can't articulate the rule, their brain just completely rejects the syntax.
So what's actually happening there?
What we are looking at is the concept of syntactic nesting, specifically with separable phrasal verbs. When the direct object is a pronoun, so words like him, her, them, it must be wedged directly between the base verb and the particle.
Yeah, the traditional grammar guides call this the pronoun rule, but that really just tells us what is happening. It doesn't really explain why. Why does the English language force us to wedge this pronoun into the middle of the phrase?
To understand the why, we really have to look beyond the written word and focus on the prosody.
The prosody.
Yeah, the actual rhythm and stress patterns of spoken English. English is a stress-timed language. We naturally emphasize nouns, verbs, and adjectives while sort of swallowing or rushing through the smaller functional words like pronouns.
Okay, so in the phrase, check it out, the verb check and the particle out are the strong rhythmic anchors.
Exactly. They carry the phonetic weight. The pronoun it is incredibly weak. It's an unstressed syllable.
Ah, I see.
So our phonetic rhythm prefers to tuck that weak, unstressed syllable safely between the two heavy, stressed, consonant sounds of the verb and the particle.
It creates a sandwich.
A pronoun sandwich. It creates this satisfying, bouncing rhythm. Check it out. Turn it off. Take them in.
That makes so much sense because if we put the weak pronoun at the very end of the sentence, like checked out it, the rhythm just kind of falls off a cliff.
Right. There's no phonetic resolution. The sentence literally loses its structural integrity.
Wow.
Now, the Reddit thread actually notes one brilliant exception that proves this phonetic rule.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If the pronoun itself carries heavy emotional stress, usually in a state of shock or disbelief, you actually can place it at the end.
Oh, like if someone tells you to look at something terrifying and you say, check out what? Or check out it.
Yes. In that rare case, the pronoun is no longer weak. You are actively forcing phonetic weight onto it so it can structurally support the end of the sentence.
That is wild.
But in standard speech, yeah, that syntactic nesting is absolutely mandatory.
But see, this introduces a massive layer of complexity for anyone trying to learn the language. Because how do you even know if a phrasal verb allows for this syntactic nesting in the first place?
It's tricky.
Because the ESL guides are very clear that not all phrasal verbs are separable. They draw a hard line between transitive and intransitive verbs.
Right, this is fundamental structural distinction. A transitive verb requires a target to act upon. It needs a direct object. You cannot just take off in the context of removing clothing, right? You must take off a jacket or your shoes. The action transfers to an object.
Right, so the verb has a target, but an intransitive verb is entirely self-contained.
Correct. Intransitive verbs do not transfer action to an object. Think of wake up or come over. You don't wake up an external object in this context. The action remains with the subject.
Right.
And the structural rule here is absolute. If a phrasal verb is intransitive, it is always inseparable.
Well, logically, that has to be true. I mean, if there's no object to receive the action, there is no noun or pronoun to wedge between the verb and the particle. You can't perform syntactic nesting if you have nothing to nest.
You've hit the nail on the head. You cannot separate a structure without an intervening element. So wake up always remains a locked unit.
Okay, so intransitive verbs are always inseparable, but even with transitive verbs, the ones that do take an object, it still feels like a massive guessing game.
Oh, it really does.
Because turn off can be separated, but look after cannot. I can say turn the music off, but I cannot say look my dog after.
Right, your brain hates that.
It does. So how is anyone supposed to memorize which ones split and which ones don't?
Well, memorizing lists is generally a terrible way to learn a language anyway. What you want to look for are the underlying patterns. And the Puzzle English source provides this highly effective heuristic, a sort of linguistic cheat code based entirely on the nature of the particle itself.
I found this fascinating. The guide suggests that if the particle is directional or spatial, words like up, down, on, off, in, out, away, back, or over,
Right.
it strongly indicates that the phrasal verb is separable.
Let's test the hypothesis. Okay, throw away. That's directional. Throw the garbage away.
Yeah.
It separates perfectly.
Yeah.
Write down. Directional. Write the number down. Again, it separates. The spatial nature of the particle allows the mind to hold the action, process the object, and then apply the direction.
Okay, let me try to break that rule. What about relational particles? Words like across, after, into, or with. The guide says these indicate an inseparable verb.
Go ahead, try to separate one.
Okay, let's take come across, meaning to find something by chance. I can say, I came across an old photo. But if I try to separate it, I came an old photo across.
No.
No, the brain entirely rejects that. The relationship between the verb and the object is just destroyed. Let's try look into, meaning to investigate. I will look the issue into. Absolutely not.
See, the heuristic holds up because relational particles depend entirely on the object following them to make semantic sense. They bind the verb strictly to the object, preventing any separation.
Wow.
And of course, if you encounter a three-part phrasal prepositional verb like put up with or run out of, the rule is uncompromising. They're always inseparable. You can never say, I ran milk out of.
Right. Okay, so we have established these incredibly nuanced, rigid, phonetic, and structural rules that govern how we construct these sentences, and we rely on them for 80% of our verbal communication.
Right.
But here is the massive contradiction that jumps out from the sources. When we sit down to write a formal academic essay or a legal contract or a corporate memo, we suddenly abandon these phrasal verbs entirely.
We drop them like a bad habit.
We do. We stop saying look into and start writing investigate. We stop saying put off and write postpone. Why do we have this glaring double standard between spoken and written English?
To understand that divide, we actually have to look away from grammar entirely and delve into the sociology of language. The academic paper from Jai on linguistic history lays this out perfectly. It is entirely about a historical class divide tracing all the way back to the year 1066.
Wait, 1066. The Norman Conquest. When William the Conqueror crossed the English Channel.
Precisely. Before 1066, Old English was an overwhelmingly Germanic language. It relied heavily on inseparable prefix verbs, and it was the language of the entire population. But when the French-speaking Normans conquered England, they brought a massive influx of French and Latin vocabulary with them.
Okay.
And practically overnight, a strict linguistic hierarchy was imposed on the country.
So the new ruling class just installed their language at the top of the social ladder.
Yes. The language of the conquerors, the Latinate vocabulary, became the exclusive domain of the educated elite. It was the language used in the royal courts, the legal system, the church, and all formal writing.
While the native Anglo-Saxon Germanic roots were relegated to the peasants, basically, the people working the fields and living in the villages.
Exactly. And we see echoes of this all over the English language today. That's why we call the living animal a cow from the Germanic, because the peasants tended the livestock. But when it arrives on the aristocrat's dining table, we call it beef from the French bouffe.
Oh, that is wild. And that dynamic applies perfectly to our verbs. Simple, single-word Latinate verbs like surrender, exit, or investigate were deemed sophisticated, educated, and formal.
Right.
Meanwhile, their Germanic, structurally complex equivalents, give up, get out, look into, were viewed as the crude, informal grunts of the working class.
It's true. The Drin paper analyzed massive linguistic corpora, so huge databases of historical texts, and proved that this 1,000-year-old prejudice is actually still fully active today.
Really?
Yes. Formal writing actively suppresses phrasal verbs. If a lawyer is drafting a document, they will never write that a corporation is going to look into a merger. They will write that they intend to investigate or examine the merger. To use the phrasal verb would undermine their perceived professional authority.
That is just crazy. We are literally still signaling our social class and education level based on military conflict that happened almost a millennium ago.
Yep.
We subconsciously judge a Germanic phrasal verb as casual simply because the Norman aristocrats looked down on the peasants who used them.
And that elitist perspective persisted for centuries. One of the most shocking details from the historical sources is that despite phrasal verbs being the absolute backbone of spoken English since the Middle Ages, the grammatical establishment completely ignored them.
Right. I read that the actual term phrasal verb did not even exist until the year 1925. Native speakers used this complex system for nearly 1,000 years before grammar books even acknowledged it as a formal category.
It's unbelievable. The term was coined by a linguist named Logan Pearsall Smith in his book Words and Idioms. Prior to 1925, grammarians, who were heavily biased toward Latin grammatical models, just treated these phrases as low-class colloquialisms or like structural errors.
Just mistakes.
Yeah, they simply didn't fit the Latin mold, so they were dismissed.
But because they belonged to the common people, they survived organically at the grassroots level. And because they evolved in the streets rather than in academic textbooks, they mutated locally. The Yandex source highlights some incredible regional variations, particularly between American and British English.
Which is the ultimate proof that phrasal verbs are a living, breathing organism. Because they aren't standardized by ancient Latin texts, they shift depending on the community using them.
Give me a good example of this regional mutation.
Okay, a classic example involves dealing with paperwork. If you walk into an office in the United States and are handed a document to complete, you will be instructed to fill out the form.
Right.
But if you walk into an office in London, you will be asked to fill in the form.
Huh. It's such a subtle shift in the spatial particle, right, from out to in. But if you use the wrong one, you instantly broadcast that you are not a local.
Exactly. Another fascinating divergence occurs with money, specifically spending money reluctantly. In the UK, if you have to pay an exorbitant fee for a parking ticket, you might say you had to fork out the money.
Right, but an American would never say fork out. They would say they had to fork it over, or perhaps fork up the cash.
Exactly. The base verb fork remains, carrying that somewhat aggressive connotation of handing something over, but the directional particle shifts based entirely on regional intuition.
The source also tracks the verb beat up, meaning to assault someone physically. That one is fairly universal across the English-speaking world.
Yeah.
But in the United States, it mutated further. You have beat on, which can mean striking a drum, but also metaphorically harassing someone. And then you have beat up on, which specifically implies bullying or picking on someone who is weaker than you. The language just keeps building these compound layers.
It does. It builds and adapts at incredible speed because it is unburdened by academic rigidity.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's kind of synthesize this. Phrasal verbs are not just arbitrary lists of vocabulary meant to torture English learners.
Not at all.
They are the intricate phonetic engine of natural speech. Mastering them requires understanding the difference between the literal trajectory of a prepositional phrase and the dynamic figurative shift of a phrasal verb.
It also requires a subconscious mastery of prosody and rhythm. Recognizing that syntactic nesting, that pronoun sandwich, exists because the English language demands that weak pronouns be sheltered between heavy, stressed consonants.
And crucially, realizing that the distinction between formal and informal English is largely an illusion. When you choose to say postpone instead of put off, you aren't just selecting a fancier word, you are actually participating in a linguistic class divide that traces its roots directly back to the Norman aristocracy of 1066.
It is a profound connection to the sociology of our past, and that historical perspective actually brings up one final, highly provocative thought for you to consider.
Okay, lay it on me.
Language, as we've seen, is never static. Right now, we are living through the most rapid technological revolution in human history. And as our lives move into the digital space, the new terminology being created is almost exclusively based on phrasal verbs.
Oh, that is a brilliant point. The entire architecture of the internet is phrasal. We log in, we scroll down, we hack into, we boot up, we click on.
Exactly. We don't use Latinate simple verbs for technology.
Yep.
We don't authenticate, we log in, we don't navigate, we scroll down.
Wow.
As text messages, social media, and digital communication increasingly blur the boundary between written and spoken English, the formal supremacy of those Latinate verbs is being severely threatened.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. In the evolutionary survival of the fittest verbs, the adaptable, rule-breaking, ancient Germanic phrasal verb is currently dominating the digital age. It really raises the question, will the formal Latinate verbs eventually be pushed into extinction entirely?
Man, it's a profound thought. As our screens completely dissolve the barrier between how we speak and how we write, those rigid aristocratic verbs might just log off for good. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, keep diving deep.